Somewhere in your kitchen right now, there's a pea that could become milk, a pumpkin seed that turns bright green the moment you blend it, and a bean so misunderstood that almost nobody who's eaten it knows it's quietly related to cheese. For thousands of years, long before dairy-free was a label on a carton, people were already pulling milk, cream, butter, and cheese out of plants, out of tubers, seeds, nuts, and beans. Today, we're going through 15 of them, the full transformation plant by plant, what they become, why it works, and what's actually going on nutritionally. Number 11 on this list has a safety story behind it, the reason it isn't prepared the way most plants on this list are. And the very last one might be the single most transformed plant on Earth. Milk, cream, yogurt, tofu, and real fermented cheese, all from one bean. If you like food history that's actually grounded in something real, subscribe and drop a comment on which one you didn't expect to see. Let's go through them. Number 1. Tiger nuts, the underground nut that makes horchata. Despite the name, tiger nuts aren't nuts at all. They're small tubers, little knobby roots that grow underground, closer in nature to a potato than an almond. They've been part of human diets for an extraordinarily long time. Archaeological evidence places tiger nuts in the diets of early hominins in Africa hundreds of thousands of years ago. In Spain, tiger nuts became the base of horchata de chufa, a centuries-old drink still sold from carts in Valencia today. What makes them unusual is the flavor. Tiger nuts are naturally sweet, with a taste often compared to coconut and almond together. That sweetness means the milk made from them needs little or no added sugar to taste indulgent. The general process is simple. The tubers are soaked until soft, then blended with water and strained to separate the milk from the fibrous pulp, the same basic method used in Valencia's horchata stalls for generations. Left to ferment briefly with a lat culture, that same base becomes a lightly tangy cultured drink. Tiger nuts are notable for their fiber content and for containing resistant starch, a type of starch that behaves more like fiber in the body and has been studied for its role in feeding beneficial gut bacteria. They also contain healthy monounsaturated fats, similar in profile to olive oil. The milk is naturally creamy, without needing much processing, and the same base can be cultured into yogurt-style drinks or thickened into a light cream. It's one of the oldest plant milk traditions in the world, and most people have never heard of the plant behind it. Number 2. Pistachios, the plant that makes green cream. Native to Central Asia and the Middle East, pistachios have been cultivated for thousands of years and hold a long-standing place in Persian, Levantine, and Mediterranean cuisine, often reserved for celebrations and gifts because of their cost and color. That green color comes from chlorophyll and carotenoid pigments naturally present in the nut, and it carries all the way through into pistachio milk, cream, and cultured spreads, no additives required. Making the milk generally starts with soaking raw pistachios to soften them, then blending with water and straining out the solids. That strained liquid can be gently reduced to concentrate it into cream, or set with a dairy-free culture and left to firm up into a spreadable cheese-style paste. Pistachios stand out among nuts for their relatively high protein and fiber content, along with potassium and vitamin B6. Their fat profile is largely unsaturated, and pistachios are frequently studied in nutrition research for their potential role in supporting healthy cholesterol levels as part of an overall diet. Pistachio cream in particular has become a phenomenon in pastry and dessert making over the last several years, prized for that same natural color and flavor intensity. Of every plant on this list, pistachio may be the one most associated with indulgence rather than health food, and yet it's carrying real nutritional density underneath that reputation. Number 3. Pumpkin seeds, the green milk surprise. Pumpkin seeds, when blended, produce a milk that comes out a soft, natural green, not from any additive, but from chlorophyll-related compounds and the seed's own pigments. Like most seed milks, it generally starts with soaking the seeds to soften them, then blending with water and straining through a fine cloth. The leftover pulp is often what becomes seed butter, or, when mixed with a live culture and left to set briefly, a green-tinted cheese-style spread. Pumpkin seeds, technically called pepitas when whole, have been part of indigenous diets across the Americas for thousands of years, long before pumpkin flesh itself was the primary reason the plant was grown. In Mesoamerican cultures, the seeds were often valued as much as the fruit. Pumpkin seeds are notably rich in magnesium, zinc, and iron relative to their size, along with plant-based protein and healthy fats. They're one of the more mineral-dense seeds commonly available, and their zinc content in particular has made them a frequent subject of nutrition research. The milk has an earthy, slightly nutty flavor with a subtle vegetal note from the green pigment. It can be thickened into cream, blended into seed butter, or cultured into a green-tinted cheese-style spread that looks striking on a plate. Pumpkin seeds are also naturally allergen-friendly for people avoiding tree nuts, which makes their milk and cream a practical option as well as a visually memorable one.
Number 4. Cashews, the secret behind creamy vegan cheese. If plant-based cheese has a workhorse ingredient, it's this one. Cashews are native to Brazil, but were spread globally by Portuguese traders centuries ago. And today, they're grown across South Asia, Southeast Asia, and West Africa. The nut itself grows outside a cashew apple, an unusual botanical structure that most people who eat cashews have never actually seen. What makes cashews so useful for dairy-style transformation is their fat structure and low fiber content compared to other nuts. When soaked in water, cashews soften enough to blend into an exceptionally smooth, almost gelatinous base, which is why they've become the foundation for so much of the cultured vegan cheese industry. Cashews provide magnesium, copper, and plant-based iron, along with unsaturated fats. They're calorie-dense, so they're often used in relatively small quantities to achieve richness. The flavor is mild and buttery, which is part of their versatility. Cashews take on other flavors well, from herbs to nutritional yeast to fermentation cultures, making them a blank canvas rather than a dominant flavor in their own right. Broadly, cashew cheese starts the same way as the milk, soaked cashews blended into a smooth paste with a little water, but instead of being strained thin. That paste is set with a live culture or acid, and for firmer styles, left to age for a period so the flavor and texture develop, following the same basic logic as traditional cheesemaking.
Brazil nuts, the rainforest nut with a catch. Brazil nuts come from towering trees in the Amazon rainforest, trees so specialized that they depend on a specific wild bee for pollination, and can take over a decade before producing their first nuts. Because of this, most Brazil nuts still come from wild harvested trees rather than plantations, making this one of the few nuts still largely gathered rather than farmed. Each nut grows inside a hard, coconut-sized pod, tightly packed together like segments of an orange, a striking structure if you've never seen one cracked open. Brazil nuts blend into a dense, rich milk and a notably heavy, luxurious cream, thanks to their high fat content, among the highest of any tree nut. As with other tree nuts, this generally means soaking the nuts to soften them, blending with water, and straining out the pulp. The cream version is simply a more concentrated take on the same base, using less water or letting the blended liquid settle so the fat that rises can be skimmed off. Here's the nutritional detail worth knowing. Brazil nuts are famous for their selenium content, an essential mineral, and they're considered one of the most concentrated natural dietary sources of it. Because of that concentration, general nutrition guidance commonly suggests treating Brazil nuts as an occasional addition rather than an everyday staple. The flavor is deep, slightly sweet, and notably richer than almond or cashew. It's part of why Brazil nut cream has quietly become a favorite among people looking for a specifically indulgent, less common plant-based cream.
6. Oats, the grain that becomes milk. Oats are the most accessible plant on this entire list, and also one of the oldest cultivated grains in human history, with a place in European diets going back thousands of years. Oat milk's rise has been one of the more remarkable stories in food in recent years, going from a niche product to one of the most widely available plant milks on the market in a very short span of time, largely because oats are inexpensive, don't require the water resources some nuts do, and produce a naturally creamy result with minimal processing. Oat milk is generally made by blending rolled oats briefly with water and straining out the solids. Unlike nuts, oats don't need soaking beforehand, which is part of why the process is so quick. That strained liquid can be simmered down into a thicker cooking cream or cultured into a mild yogurt-style product. Oats are well known for containing beta-glucan, a soluble fiber that has been widely studied and is associated with supporting healthy cholesterol levels. Oats also provide a modest amount of plant protein and iron. The milk has a mild, slightly sweet, faintly grainy flavor, and it's especially good at frothing, which is part of why it's become a favorite base for coffee. The same oat base can be turned into cooking cream, spreadable butter alternatives, and cultured yogurt-style products. Of everything on this list, oats are the clearest example of how something ordinary and cheap can still be transformed into something useful.
Number 7. Almonds, the classic dairy-free nut. Almonds are probably the most familiar plant milk on this entire list, and for good reason.
they've been used to make milk for far longer than most people realize. Almond milk actually has medieval roots. It was widely used in European cooking during the Middle Ages, particularly during religious fasting periods when dairy was restricted, because almond milk kept longer than fresh milk and was considered an acceptable substitute. So the modern almond milk trend is in reality centuries old. Almonds themselves are native to the Middle East and South Asia, and they've long been valued for their fat and protein content. Nutritionally, almonds are a good source of vitamin E, an antioxidant nutrient, along with magnesium and fiber. The general process mirrors that medieval method. Almonds are soaked to soften their skins, blended with water, and strained through a fine cloth. Straining the leftover pulp more thoroughly and setting it with a culture is what produces the ricotta-style cheese, while blending the whole almond without straining at all produces the classic smooth almond butter. The milk has a light, slightly sweet, nutty flavor, and the same basic base can also be turned into cream and cultured into yogurt.
Number 8. Sunflower seeds, the nut-free cheese base. Sunflower seeds are one of the best-kept secrets for people who can't use tree nuts at all. Native to North America, sunflowers were cultivated by indigenous peoples for thousands of years before being introduced to Europe, where the seeds eventually became a food staple in their own right, particularly across Eastern Europe and Russia. They're both allergen-friendly and versatile. They can become milk, cream, a mild seed butter, a tangy sour cream substitute, and a soft, spreadable cheese-style product, all without a single tree nut or dairy ingredient involved. Sunflower seed milk generally follows the same basic pattern as most seed milks: a soak, a blend, and a strain. The leftover pulp is typically what's used for the tangy, sour cream-style spreads, once it's mixed with an acid or a live culture, and left to develop flavor briefly. Sunflower seeds provide vitamin E, selenium, and healthy unsaturated fats, along with a modest amount of plant protein. The flavor is mild and slightly earthy on its own, but sunflower seeds take on tang and acidity very well, which is why they're a common base for cultured, cheese-style products that rely on fermentation for flavor, rather than the seed itself.
Number 9. Watermelon seeds, the forgotten seeds that become milk. This one most viewers will need to see twice to believe. Watermelon originated in Africa, and for a large part of its long history, the seeds, not just the flesh or the point, in parts of West Africa, Central Africa, and the Middle East. Dried and roasted watermelon seeds have been eaten as a staple snack food for centuries, and they remain a common seed food across China and Southeast Asia today, usually seasoned and cracked open by hand. What almost nobody realizes is that shelled watermelon seeds, the soft, pale kernel underneath the black hole, blend into a genuinely creamy, mild milk, closer in texture to sunflower or pumpkin seed milk than anything watermelon flavored. Shelled watermelon seeds are a notably good source of plant protein and magnesium, along with zinc and healthy unsaturated fats, a nutrient profile that punches well above what most people would expect from a fruit's discarded seeds. Making the milk generally follows the same basic pattern as other seed milks. Shell seeds are soaked to soften them, blended with water, and strained to remove the fibrous solids. That same base, blended with less water and for longer, becomes a smooth seed butter. And when mixed with a live culture and left to set, it turns into a mild, savory, cheese-style spread. The flavor is mild and slightly nutty, with none of the sweetness you'd associate with the fruit itself, which is part of why it works so well in savory applications rather than sweet ones.
Number 10. Coconut, nature's ready-made cream. The coconut palm has been central to life across the tropics for thousands of years, used for food, fiber, building material, and drink, earning it the nickname Tree of Life in several cultures. Unlike most of the plants on this list, coconut doesn't need to be blended with much water to create richness, because coconut flesh is already naturally high in fat. That's why coconut cream separates so easily and dramatically from coconut milk, and why coconut is often the go-to base when a recipe calls specifically for heavy, whippable cream in a dairy-free context. Coconut milk and cream are generally extracted by blending grated coconut flesh with hot water and straining it. The cream is simply the fat-rich layer that rises and separates once the blended liquid is left to settle. Culturing that same base with a live yogurt culture, or aging it further, is what produces coconut yogurt and cheese-style products. Coconut is distinct from most nuts and seeds on this list because its fat is largely saturated fat, primarily in the form of medium-chain triglycerides, which have been studied for how the body metabolizes them differently compared to other saturated fats. Because of the saturated fat content,
coconut products are often recommended in moderation as part of a varied diet. The flavor is instantly recognizable, sweet, tropical, and rich, and coconut can be cultured into yogurt, aged into cheese-style products, or churned into a coconut butter that behaves remarkably like dairy butter when chilled.
Lupini beans, the high-protein cheese bean. This is the plant with a story most people have never heard, and it's worth telling carefully. Lupini beans have been eaten around the Mediterranean and parts of Latin America for thousands of years, usually sold pickled in brine as a salty snack food. What most people don't know is that lupini beans in their natural state contain bitter alkaloid compounds that make them unpleasant to eat and, in sufficient concentration, unsafe. Because of that, lupini-based milks, yogurts, and cheese-style products are best approached through beans or products that have already been properly debittered and prepared, rather than attempting the process from scratch without that traditional knowledge. Once lupini beans have been properly debittered, whether through that traditional soak and rinse process or industrially, making the milk generally follows the same basic pattern as other legumes, blending the prepared beans with water and straining out the solids. The higher protein content is what allows that same base to be set into a notably firm, sliceable cheese using methods similar in principle to traditional cheesemaking. That protein density is exactly why lupini has become a serious contender for firm, sliceable, high-protein cheese alternatives in recent years.
Number 12. Peanuts, the affordable dairy alternative. Peanuts are technically a legume, not a tree nut, which surprises people who've eaten them their entire lives without knowing it. Native to South America, peanuts were carried around the world by traders and colonizers centuries ago, and eventually became deeply embedded in West African, Southeast Asian, and Southern U.S. cuisine, often independently developing into a food staple in each of those places. Peanuts blend into a milk that's noticeably richer and more full body than most people expect, largely because of their higher fat and protein content compared to grains like oats. That same richness allows peanuts to become a creamy plant-based cream and a soft, spreadable cheese-style product, in addition to the familiar peanut butter. Peanut milk is generally made by blending raw or roasted peanuts with water and straining the mixture, much like other nut milks. The peanut's higher fat content is what gives the strained liquid its noticeably fuller body. Reducing that liquid produces cream, while skipping the straining step entirely and blending for longer is what turns peanuts into peanut butter. Peanuts provide a solid amount of plant protein, niacin, and healthy unsaturated fats, making peanut milk one of the more protein-forward options on this list relative to its cost.
Number 13. Macadamia nuts, the luxury butternut. Macadamia nuts are native to Australia, where indigenous communities harvested them long before the nut was commercially cultivated, primarily in Hawaii, starting in the 20th century, which is part of why macadamias carry a reputation as one of the more expensive nuts available today. That price tag is connected to texture. Macadamias have one of the highest fat contents of any tree nut, which is exactly why macadamia milk and cream come out remarkably smooth and rich, often compared to the texture of real dairy cream more closely than almond or oat milk can achieve. Making the milk follows the familiar pattern: soak, blend, strain. But because macadamias were so fat-dense, even a short blend produces a notably rich cream-like result. Blending the whole nut without adding water for much longer is what turns it into the smooth macadamia butter. Macadamia thought is predominantly monounsaturated, the same category of fat found in olive oil, and macadamias also provide manganese and thiamine. The flavor is buttery and subtly sweet, with very little of the sharper nuttiness found in almonds or peanuts, which is part of why macadamia butter, in particular, has developed a reputation as one of the smoothest, most luxurious nut butters available. Macadamia might be the closest any plant on this list comes to replicating the exact mouthfeel of real cream and butter.
Number 14. Yellow peas, the modern high-protein milk. This is the plant most viewers would never guess belongs on this list at all. Yellow peas are an ordinary, inexpensive crop, long used in split pea soup and animal feed, not historically associated with anything resembling milk. That's exactly what makes their recent transformation so interesting. Yellow pea protein has become one of the most significant ingredients in modern plant-based milk over the last decade, precisely because of its nutritional profile rather than any traditional culinary use. Yellow peas contain a notably high amount of plant protein for a legume, along with iron and a relatively neutral flavor once processed, which makes it easier to create a milk that's both protein-rich and mild-tasting, a combination that's difficult to achieve with most other plants on this list.
Pea-based milk, creamers, yogurt, and cheese-style products have grown quickly in the plant-based food industry, specifically because they can match or exceed the protein content of dairy milk, something oat and almond milk generally cannot do on their own. Unlike most plants on this list, pea milk isn't typically something made by simply blending whole peas with water at home. It's generally produced by isolating the pea protein first, then recombining it with water and plant fats to recreate a milk-like consistency, which is part of why most pea milk on shelves is a manufactured product rather than a homemade one. It's a strange kind of ending to this part of the story, one of the most humble, least glamorous crops, turning out to be one of the most nutritionally significant.
Number 15, soybeans, the complete dairy transformer. And here's the one that does more than any other plant on this list. Soybeans have been cultivated in East Asia for thousands of years, and the technique of transforming them into milk, curd, and fermented products is ancient. Tofu-making techniques date back over 1,000 years in China, long before anyone used the word dairy-free. What makes soy unique is range. No other plant on this list becomes milk, cream, yogurt, tofu, cream cheese-style spreads, and fermented aged cheese, using traditional cheese-making cultures and techniques. Soy protein has a structure that allows it to curdle and set in ways that more closely mimic dairy proteins than almost any other plant protein available. The traditional method is one of the oldest documented food processes in the world. Dried soybeans are soaked, blended with water, then simmered and strained to separate the milk from the pulp. Adding a coagulant to that hot soy milk is what causes the proteins to curdle and set into tofu, and it's that same curdling principle combined with live cultures and aging that produces soy-based cheeses. Soybeans are considered a complete protein, containing all 9 essential amino acids, and they're also a source of isoflavones, plant compounds that have been studied extensively for their potential role in hormone-related health research, with findings that vary and continue to be studied rather than settled. The flavor of soy milk is mild and slightly beany on its own, but it transforms dramatically once fermented. The same bean that makes a plain glass of milk also makes some of the most complex fermented cheeses in the plant-based world. Tubers, tree nuts, seeds, legumes, and one grain, and every single one of them capable of becoming milk, cream, butter, or cheese. Almond milk existed in medieval kitchens. Tiger nut horchata has been sold on the same street corners in Valencia for centuries. Tofu making is over 1,000 years old. What feels like a modern plant-based trend is in most cases just old knowledge finding its way back into the mainstream. We now understand, with real nutritional research behind it, why some of these plants transform so well. Every plant on this list transforms the way it does because of something specific happening in its chemistry. If you want to start exploring this yourself, you don't need special equipment. A blender, a strainer or nut milk bag, and time are enough to begin. Start with something forgiving like oats or cashews, which need very little technique to turn out well. This video is for educational purposes only and is not a step-by-step tutorial. Before preparing any of these foods, please consult reliable, recipe-specific sources and follow proper hygiene, preparation, and food safety guidance. If this changed how you think about where milk and cheese can actually come from, subscribe for more of this kind of deep, grounded food history. Thanks for watching.